Hey everybody, Angsty here. I'm currently vaping on my Billetbox Rev 4. Now this is the newer one that came out a little while back that has the full 18650 and the DNA 40 inside, which I really quite like. But I'm not here to talk about the Billetbox. What I'm here to talk about is the atomizer that I've been using quite a bit lately, called the Uno by a guy named Ohman. Now I met Ohman on ECR ECF a really long time ago, years ago at this point. And I knew him as a guy who made cool drip tips, and he does make cool drip tips still if you ask him really nicely. Um, but he, including this guy right here, which is an integrated drip tip for the billet box. It kind of takes the place of the top nut that's there on the billet box, but also functions as a drip tip, and I really quite like it. But one of the other things he makes is called the kangaroo, and that is what kind of the billet box is normally used as. It is an adapter for Kanger SSOCC coils. And that's sort of the problem with the billet box, right? Is you can either run a Cardo, like it was 2011, or you can use one of these adapters, like what Ohm makes one of them called the Kangaroo, or you can use the Uno or something similar to that, which is rebuildable, which is really, really slick. Now, I'm one who, while I enjoy the SSOCC coils with the Kangaroo in here, I also really hate having to pay another company to continue using something that I already own. So having something rebuildable is really quite nice. Now, this guy is made out of implant grade titanium, which, well, of course it's titanium. It's Ohman. Ohman does what he do. He makes a lot of stuff out of titanium. So it's cool that it's titanium. It's cool that it's not going to ever corrode and get nasty. But the other thing is it kind of maybe affects the price a little bit. These guys aren't the cheapest, but $65. Not too shabby, not too expensive considering all in, and the fact that you can make your billet box work as well as it can work with this thing flavor wise. So instead of waffling on too long, let's go down type and see what's going on. So here is the man of the hour. This is the Ohman Uno, made by a dude called, his nickname is Ohman. His name is Bret. Nice guy. Makes a cool atomizer, solid titanium. The main barrel, which honestly just means it's light and strong and sort of cool because it's titanium. Come on, implant grade too, so this thing's not going to be corroding or messing up, no matter what juice you're got surrounding it. So we can see here it's kind of like a Cardo shape, which makes sense because it goes in the billet box. But instead of like a Cardo where you're filled with filling material up here, we're just going to have a coil sitting right behind that window there, and some wick going right through, and that's it. It's a simple design, but it works really, really well. You can see the top is put on just with some threads. Those guys come off. See, the top is kind of ready for your top nut O-ring, or in my case, I've got an integrated tip that you'll see in just a minute, and the other side is just those threadings. Bottom here, this is your little magic part where your coil sits right back down in there. In the bottom, you've got a pin and a insulator, and they kind of come off really easily right now because there's no coil in there, and I'll show you in just a minute how that works. So your pin just lifts straight out, and your insulator lifts straight out like that, and it will mount up a coil. Now, I found it easiest to either grab the pin from your coil jig, like this one from Coil Master, or I just happen to have a rod that's 2.5 millimeters, and I use that. So here's an example coil. This guy's 2.5 millimeters in diameter, and the big thing to know about the coil's legs is the legs need to be really straight. So when you pull it off your spool, either give it a real good tug to straighten it, or throw it in a chunk of your drill and just give it a few turns, and holding it with some pliers, and that will straighten it right out. So you want to have these things really straight because it needs to kind of stand on its own inside the barrel here, and you'll see why in just a minute. So this little rod guy, you're going to throw both your legs straight down and sort of lay it here in the channel and hold it in place. We'll turn it upside down so we can work on this nice and easily. Now your two legs here, obviously one's going to be a positive and one's going to be a negative. Doesn't really matter which is which, so I'm just going to take the shorter one here and just bend it off to the side like that. And we'll take our insulator and drop it back down the mat. We're going to feed it right on top of the other leg. Let that fall right down, and we're going to push that down into place. And then with your other leg, we're going to bend that in the opposite direction. Sort of set that there and kind of hold it in place. Then we'll take our positive pin and just kind of jam it in here, and that will expand the insulator and hold everything nice and tidy in place. And you can see if we turn it around, our coil is still exactly where we want it to be. So the other important thing about mounting this guy is these leads need to be cut very flush. Now the nice thing about the Uno is you can see we step in for the insulator, and then we step in again for the positive. So when we nip these guys out of the way, if you're pretty careful and you get them really nice and close, boy, that's just totally going to find my foot later, isn't it? Isn't that how it always works? We're just going to cut this nice and close too. So we're going to give it a little feel, make sure there's nothing hanging out and going to hang up on our O-rings later. And it looks like we've got these things nice and flush. You can feel it there, but it's inside the outer diameter. So when we slide this into our billet box, you know, we won't get any O-ring shredding business, which can happen with any of these atomizers. We're going to kind of give that thing a little push, make sure we're still there. Now, our coil, pretty close. Not exactly where we're going to want it, but we want to make sure it's off the wall, the barrel, which we will do just by giving it a little push. Now, one thing I figured out when I was starting to do this, I was like, well, we've got this thing built, but there's no really way to pulse the coils and kind of break them in because we're not 510 threaded on the bottom. And then I kind of thought through it. I'm like, well, actually, we don't need the tank. We can actually just go ahead and put this guy on and either set your top nut on here or my integrated Ohman drip tip. Got to pop it on top and just put it in our billet box. And so we'll have obviously have our positive connection on the bottom, but then it'll be grounded just like it always is on top. And we'll give it a few little pulses. Right? So you can see this guy is glowing nice and evenly. We've given that a few pulses, and that should be fine. Now, be careful. This thing's going to be hot. You are just having a burning metal thing inside. So, a little blow. There we go. Careful. Warm. So we're going to pull this guy off. Let's see what we see. Look at there. Nice pulsed coil. Now, we are almost exactly in the center, and that's okay because we're about to push wick through this thing anyway, and that is going to dislodge us a little bit even if we're super careful. So I'm not going to be fussed too much about this right now. The biggest thing is we want to make sure we're not getting a short here, which means it's we're touching the side somewhere all the way down, which we're not, except for when I messed up and did that in the billet box, and that was my fault. Because I'm on camera, and of course it's going to do this, because this is, of course, not the first time that I have that I've shot this tonight. I actually just lost the whole video footage just a moment ago. I'm going to be putting a little bit of shadow on here because shadow is awesome, and it's the wick that I like. You do not need much, obviously, because it's just going to be going straight through the size of a cardo, which, doesn't require very much wick. So we're going to take here. We're going to get us most of the way through here. And we're going to pull through. And then we're going to do the little bit of magic that is required to get this thing wicked properly. Boy, that was, I just got a hold of the bottom of the cotton, and it pulled funny. That's alright, because we're not going to use that end part anyway, because it had my greasy finger oils all over it. There we go. You can see that 2.5 millimeter coil has got just enough to wick to fill up those little triangles, or little rectangles. And I am going to now give us a little juice, because we're going to use the side of this after we reassemble him here as kind of a guide. Now, one of the things I like about the Ohman Uno is you can see here this little divot, this little indentation there. You kind of see that guy there. And what that's cool, or the reason that's cool, is when you go to pass this thing through the billet box into the tank, it's going to give it a little bit of room to be. It's not going to have to be totally flush with the outer barrel, and that's going to be pretty important here in a moment. You'll see. Now, I cut these things just wide. You want to leave yourself a little bit of room on the outside because you want to have lots and plenty of wick to block those little juice flow channels, because we don't want any leaking, because leaking is bad. So we're going to give that just a moment to set up, and I'm going to give my get my door kind of ready here for the filling, and I'm going to take our little guy and kind of give her just a little wiggle. Now, getting this thing through is not impossible, but you do have to give it a little bit of juice. Oh, trying to be careful with that door. There we go. So we are through, and what I like to do now is pull down our door and see what we need to do. Now you can see that we did get pulled up a little bit by the O-ring that time, probably because I had nice and fluffy wicks. So all I'm going to do is just kind of give that thing a little jab, and then rotate it around, and do the same thing on the other side. Just refluff out that cotton, so that we're going to be covering the whole thing. You know what? I'll give it a little more juice, just to make sure we are nice and covered with our refluffed out wick. So, no juice getting through those two channels. So we're going to continue on down a little bit. Push our door closed a little bit. We're going to line us up and gently boop, pop it through. Now we're going to give ourselves a little bit of juice. I've primarily been running embellishment in here because why not? I love the juice. Give this thing a good whack. So the last feature I want to tell you about here is the airflow restrictor. So the only real accessory you get with the with this Addy is a little O-ring. And when I first got it, I wasn't exactly sure what it was, but I quickly found out that it is a restrictor for the bottom. You can see the bottom here. You got lots of air that can come through this thing, lots and lots. But if you don't like quite this much air, which I do not, I like a restricted lung, and this just helps. So this is just an O-ring that kind of goes and just physically blocks some of that air coming through. That's it. Easy peasy. Now that that's there, of course my cat's going to start hollering. That would be great, won't it? There you go. We're now reinstalled. We're going to throw our integrated tip back in there, or your top nut. Meow. Meow. Todd's got his dog. I've got a very talkative cat. Boom. So let's fire us back up. Look at there. Nice and happy. Make sure we vape. Wow. With the door off, the thing is not quiet, is it? But there we go. That is the Ohman Uno. So that's how you rebuild the Uno from Ohman. Should probably go through a few pros and cons here pretty quick right here at the end to wrap up. The first pro is flavor. I find this to be a bit more flavorful and more accurate for at least my ADV abolishment than really anything else I've tried in the Billetbox. So that's definitely a pro. It's rebuildable. It's another pro. That's something that we talked about in the intro. I like the fact that I can rebuild this for pennies and just be done with it. And it's titanium, which is somewhat magical and cool. I don't know if it's a pro, but I think it's cool. There's a fact that I should probably throw in there. It is $65, so it's not the cheapest thing in the world, but considering it's rebuildable, you don't have to continue buying heads. It's not too bad, really. Once you pay a reasonable adapter for other things, by the time you buy some coil heads, this thing will have paid for itself. The other thing that I should mention that's kind of a pro and a con is the airflow. I like this thing. There's quite a bit of air. I actually put the restrictor O-ring in it, and it's still a nice restricted lung hit. It doesn't mouth the lung well. Now you can put another O-ring on it, and it gets close, but it's an awfully loose mouth the lung. So if you're a mouth the lung person, this guy might not be the most optimal thing for you, in my opinion. As far as cons goes, it's not hard to build, but you do kind of have to. It's got a little knack to it, and you kind of gotta be careful. But once it's there and it's built, obviously you can dry fire like we talked about earlier when we were building it, and clean it right out, and just throw another wick in there. And here, unfortunately, that leads to the next con, where I have found that you kind of do have to rewick this kind of often. Now, abolishment, I run in a tank easily for a week, so it's not a gum up, gunky kind of juice. it usually vapes pretty cleanly. This thing, I find that I have to, re-wick, not rebuild, but re-wick this thing every couple of days or so because it just sort of gets a little off. The only thing I can attribute that to is the fact that there's so little wick in there. I think what little gunking does go on, I think it's just more readily apparent, and it tastes really good. So when it starts falling off, you kind of notice it. It is what it is, as they say in the ridiculous business world. But the short of it is, the Uno is a pretty good buy, and it's a good one. You should go pick one up if you like the Billetbox and you like to rebuild things.